I wanted to thank you properly for last night. I'm very grateful.
Anyone would have done the same.
The night that could have ruined everything. The police lights painted the warehouse wall red and blue, flashing like a warning meant for someone else, until Daniel Carter realized they were meant for his boss. That was the moment everything slowed. The forklifts were silent, the loading bays were empty. The cold night air smelled of oil, dust, and rain-soaked asphalt. Daniel stood frozen near the employee exit, his jacket half-zipped, keys clenched in his hand, watching a scene that felt unreal, like something he wasn't supposed to witness. Claire Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Logistics, was arguing with a police officer in the parking lot, and she was drunk. Not the sloppy, falling over kind, worse, the kind that came with sharp words, unsteady confidence, and the dangerous belief that you were still in control when you absolutely were not. Daniel's first instinct was simple: leave. This wasn't his problem. It couldn't be. He had a daughter waiting at home, asleep on the couch because she refused to go to bed without him. He had a lunch to pack for tomorrow, a sink full of dishes, a life held together by routines that collapsed if he was late even once. He took a step toward his car. Then Claire's voice cut through the air. "You have no idea who you're talking to." The words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to stop him cold. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in mirrors during his worst moments, when fear disguised itself as pride, when exhaustion dressed up as anger. He'd heard it from his late wife once, on the night she admitted she was too tired to keep fighting her illness. He'd heard it from himself the day the hospital bills arrived. He turned back. The officer was calm, hands resting near his belt, posture firm but not aggressive. Claire stood barefoot on the pavement, her heels discarded near the curb, one hand gripping her phone like a weapon, the other gesturing wildly. "Ma'am," the officer said, measured, "I'm asking you again. Have you consumed alcohol tonight?" Claire laughed a brittle, humorless sound. "I had dinner." That's not a crime. Daniel could see it clearly now, the slight sway, the delayed reactions, the way her eyes struggled to focus. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was bad. He should walk away, he told himself. Nothing good ever came from inserting yourself into your boss's personal disaster. He was a warehouse supervisor, not a fixer. A single dad with no safety net, not a hero. But his feet wouldn't move. Claire? The name slipped out before he could stop it. Both of them turned. For the first time since Daniel had known her, Claire Whitmore looked small. Her eyes widened, the anger draining from her face and leaving something raw behind panic, naked and unguarded. "Daniel," she said, softer than he'd ever heard her. Too soft for someone used to being obeyed. The officer's gaze shifted. "You know her?" Daniel nodded. His heart pounded so hard he felt it in his throat. "Yes, sir, I work here. She's my boss?" The officer raised an eyebrow. "That so?" "Yes." Claire straightened instinctively, as if remembering who she was supposed to be. "This is unnecessary," she snapped. "I'm perfectly capable of driving home." Daniel flinched. No, she wasn't. He glanced at the car luxury sedan, engine still warm. If she got behind the wheel, there would be no fixing what came next. Not for her, not for the company, not for anyone unlucky enough to be on the road. The officer sighed, clearly tired. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle." "I will not," Claire said, crossing her arms. "You're wasting your time?" Daniel saw it then, the invisible cliff she was standing on. He thought of Lily, of the nights he'd come home too tired to smile and still forced himself to, because she needed it. He thought of the choices that separated disaster from survival, often by inches. He spoke before fear could stop him. "Officer," Daniel said, stepping forward, voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "If she's been drinking, I can drive her home." Claire turned sharply. "What? I live close?" Daniel continued, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. "I'm sober. Her car can stay here overnight. I'll make sure she gets home safely." The officer studied him closely now. Claire stared at Daniel like he'd lost his mind. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Yes, he did. Because if he walked away, he'd replay this moment forever. "And you are?" the officer asked. "Daniel Carter." "Warehouse supervisor." The officer considered this, looked at Claire, looked back at Daniel. And you'll take responsibility for her? Yes, sir. Silence stretched. Finally, the officer nodded. All right, but the car stays. And I don't want to see her behind a wheel tonight. Relief crashed through Daniel so fast his knees nearly gave out. Claire didn't speak as Daniel unlocked his car. She climbed into the passenger seat slowly, carefully, like someone afraid the world might tilt too far if she moved too fast. They drove in silence. The city lights blurred past, reflections stretching across the windshield. Daniel kept both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed forward. He could smell the wine, now rich, expensive, mixed with something sharper, regret, maybe. You shouldn't have done that? Claire said finally. Yes, Daniel replied quietly. I should have, she laughed under her breath. You just saved me from a headline. He didn't respond. You know what they'd say? She continued. CEO arrested for DUI? The board would have my head. The investors would panic. The company would survive, Daniel said. People always do. She turned to look at him. Really look at him. You don't act like someone who believes that. Daniel's jaw tightened. I believe in getting home safe. The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they reached her townhouse, Claire hesitated with her hand on the door. Daniel, she said. I won't forget this. He nodded politely. He didn't believe her. Because forgetting was easier. And powerful people were very good at it. He drove home afterward, mind buzzing, heart heavy. Lily was asleep on the couch, blanket tangled around her legs, cartoons still playing softly. He lifted her carefully, carried her to bed, and brushed hair from her face. Daddy? She murmured. I'm here, he whispered. That night sleep didn't come easily. Morning arrived too fast. Daniel woke before his alarm, stomach knotted, dread creeping in before his feet even hit the floor. The memory of flashing lights replayed behind his eyes. He showered quickly, dressed quietly, and packed Lily's lunch with more care than usual. Apple slices cut, just right, a note tucked inside her bag. At breakfast, Lily studied him over her cereal. You look serious, she said. I am, Daniel admitted. Did you do something bad? He smiled softly. No, I did something right, she nodded, satisfied with that answer. Dropping her at school, Daniel kissed her forehead a little longer than usual. At work the air felt different. Whispers traveled faster. People glanced at him, then away. By the time he reached his desk, Claire's assistant was waiting. Mr. Carter, she said. Miss Whitmore wants to see you? Now? There it was. The moment he'd been bracing for. He straightened his shoulders and followed her down the hall. Claire's office door closed behind him with a soft click. She stood by the window, sunlight cutting sharp lines across the floor, coffee untouched in her hand. Perfectly composed, untouchable again, almost. Sit down, she said. Daniel didn't. She turned, met his eyes. Please. He sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Claire exhaled, slowly, like someone releasing a breath they'd been holding all night. I was wrong, she said. Last night. In more ways than one. Daniel said nothing. I could have ruined everything, she continued. Not just my career. People depend on this company, families. She swallowed. And you stepped in when I didn't deserve it. She slid a folder across the desk. Daniel didn't open it yet. I'm not going to pretend last night didn't happen, Claire said. And I'm not going to punish you for doing the right thing. She met his gaze. I won't forget. Daniel finally opened the folder. And his life tilted just slightly toward something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for in a long time. But that realization and everything it would change belonged to the next chapter. For now, all Daniel knew was this. One decision, made in a parking lot under broken lights, had started something neither of them could undo. By the time Daniel Carter stepped out of Claire Whitmore's office, the folder still warm in his hands, his entire sense of balance felt off as if the floor beneath Whitmore Logistics had shifted just enough to make him question gravity. People smiled at him in the hallway. That alone was unsettling. Not the polite, professional nods he was used to, but real smiles. Curious ones, respectful ones. The kind that said something has changed, even if no one knew exactly what. Daniel didn't smile back right away. He didn't trust it yet. He walked to his desk, sat down slowly, and opened the folder again just to make sure it was real. The words hadn't changed. warehouse operations manager. Immediate effect, salary adjustment, flexible hours. He closed the folder. A part of him waited for someone to burst out laughing, for Claire to step out of her office and say this was a mistake or worse, a test. But the day passed. Meetings happened. Emails came in addressed to him with a new title beneath his name. Responsibilities shifted almost immediately. And still, nothing bad happened. That night, Daniel picked Lily up from after-school care before sunset for the first time in months. She ran toward him, backpack bouncing, ponytail crooked. "You're early." "I know," he said, crouching as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "How do you feel about tacos tonight?" Her gasp was dramatic. "On a school night? Living dangerously," he said. At home, Lily did her homework at the kitchen table while Daniel cooked. The radio played softly. The air felt lighter. Not perfect, but possible. "Daddy," Lily said suddenly, "are you happy?" The question landed heavier than he expected. He paused, spatula hovering over the pan. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm getting there." She nodded like that made sense, then went back to her math. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel sat alone on the couch, the glow of the city slipping through the blinds. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Daniel," Claire's voice said. "It's me," he straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't do that," she said quickly. "Not right now?" A pause. "I just wanted to say something I didn't say properly this morning." He waited. "Thank you," Claire said. "Not as my employee?" "As a person, you already did," Daniel replied. "I know, but gratitude doesn't expire when it's spoken once." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just careful. "I won't take advantage of what you did," she continued. "I won't blur lines or make this awkward." Daniel almost smiled. "A little late for that." "I don't expect anything in return," he said. "I know," Claire said softly. "That's why it mattered." They hung up shortly after. Daniel slept better than he had in weeks. Claire Whitmore did not sleep well at all. The townhouse felt too quiet, the walls too still. She lay awake replaying the night on an endless loop, the officer's calm voice, the flash of lights, the way Daniel had stepped forward without hesitation. No fear. No bargaining, just action. She rolled onto her side, staring at the ceiling. For years, she'd told herself she drank because her job was stressful, because responsibility weighed heavy, because silence was unbearable. But last night had stripped those excuses bare. The truth was uglier. She drank because control terrified her when she lost it, because admitting weakness felt more dangerous than any scandal, because asking for help meant acknowledging she couldn't do everything alone. And a warehouse supervisor, someone she barely knew beyond performance reports and time. Sheets had seen her at her worst and chosen compassion anyway. That unsettled her more than the alcohol ever had. The next morning, Claire canceled her evening plans, then her weekend ones. She scheduled a meeting with her therapist, something she'd been postponing for months. At work, she watched Daniel from a distance. He didn't act different. Didn't flaunt his promotion. Didn't linger near her office or try to leverage what he knew. He just worked, efficient, calm, focused. It was infuriatingly admirable. By Friday, Claire called him into her office again. This time the door stayed open. "I want to be clear," she said. "Your promotion wasn't charity. And it wasn't guilt." "I know," Daniel said. She studied him. "Do you?" "Yes," he replied. "Because if it was, I wouldn't trust it." Something like relief crossed her face. "Good," she said. "Because I need people around me who don't need me to be perfect." That surprised her as much as it surprised him. The weeks that followed were strange, not dramatic, not explosive, just different. Daniel left early on Wednesdays, just as promised. No one questioned it. In fact, Claire made it policy flexible hours for parents, quietly rolled out company-wide. People noticed, so did Lily. "Why is your boss being nice?" she asked one night. Daniel laughed. "She always was. Just didn't show it much." Lily considered that. "Maybe she was sad." "Maybe," Daniel said. Claire, meanwhile, found herself lingering in conversations she used to cut short. Asking questions she'd never thought to ask, listening. One afternoon, she overheard two employees talking about Daniel. "He's solid," one said. "Doesn't talk much, but when he does, it matters." Claire kept walking, heart tight in a way she didn't recognize. The dinner invitation came unexpectedly. It was late. Daniel was finishing reports when Claire appeared at his office door, jacket in hand. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "No," he said. "Have you?" She smiled faintly. "That's what I thought." He hesitated. "This isn't a work thing?" "No," she said. "It's a human thing." They chose a small restaurant, quiet, unassuming, far from the places Claire usually went. She didn't order wine. Daniel noticed, didn't comment. Conversation came slowly at first. Work, then Lily, then childhood memories neither had shared with anyone at the office before. Claire spoke about growing up with parents who valued achievement over affection. About learning early that love was conditional. Daniel listened. He spoke about his wife. About the hospital nights. About learning how to braid hair from YouTube tutorials at 3 in the morning. They didn't rush. When they parted, Claire said, "Thank you for not treating me like something fragile." Daniel nodded. "Thank you for not pretending you are." The shift from boss to something else was subtle. Too subtle for gossip, too slow for scandal. Just two people choosing honesty over pretense. One Saturday, Claire found herself standing awkwardly at the edge of a playground while Daniel pushed Lily on the swings. "You don't have to stay," Daniel said. "I want to," Claire replied. Lily eyed her suspiciously. "Are you Daddy's boss?" "I was," Claire said carefully. Lily frowned. "Was?" Claire glanced at Daniel. "I think now I'm just his friend." Lily accepted this with a nod. "Okay," trust given freely. Claire felt something shift inside her chest. Later that evening, as Daniel tucked Lily into bed, she asked, "Is she lonely?" "Yes," Daniel said softly. "Then tell her she can come again," Lily said. "Lonely people need friends," Daniel smiled, throat tight. "I will." That night, Claire stood alone on her balcony, city lights stretching endlessly before her. For the first time in years, she didn't reach for a drink. She reached for her phone instead. "Claire, thank you for today." "Daniel, anytime." She stared at the screen, then typed, "Claire, I meant what I said. I didn't forget." Daniel read the message slowly. He typed back, "Daniel, I know." And for the first time since that night in the parking lot, both of them understood the same truth. What began as a favor given without expectation was becoming something neither of them could ignore. Not a debt, not a secret, but a quiet promise neither had spoken out loud yet. And once made, it would change everything that followed. If Daniel Carter had learned anything in the years since becoming a single father, it was this: stability was fragile. It didn't shatter loudly, it didn't announce itself. It cracked quietly, missed paychecks, bad timing, one wrong conversation at work. Stability was something you protected with routine and caution, something you held with both hands and prayed wouldn't slip. So even after weeks of smooth days and early Wednesdays, Daniel still woke every morning waiting for the catch. The promotion felt real now. The title had settled. The raise had cleared. Lily's life had softened around the edges, less rushing, more breathing room. But deep inside, Daniel carried a quiet fear that it could all vanish just as suddenly as it had arrived, because it had come from one night, and nights had consequences. The morning began like any other. Daniel woke before the alarm, packed Lily's lunch, and walked her to school beneath a pale sky that promised rain. She skipped ahead, humming to herself. "You're smiling again," she said suddenly, turning around. "I always smile," Daniel replied. "No," Lily said seriously. "This one is different." Daniel didn't argue. At work, the office buzzed with unusual energy. People whispered near the coffee station. A few glanced toward Claire Whitmore's office, its glass walls opaque for once. Something was happening. Daniel sat at his desk, pulling up inventory reports when his inbox chimed. Meeting, executive conference room, 10 a.m. mandatory. His stomach tightened. He scanned the attendee list. Senior leadership, HR, legal. His name sat near the bottom. This was it. The catch. By the time 10 o'clock arrived, Daniel's nerves had wrapped themselves tight around his chest. He took a seat at the long table, hands folded neatly in front of him. Claire entered last. She looked composed, sharp suit, steady posture, but Daniel noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw set before she spoke. "Thank you for coming," she began. This meeting is about accountability, a murmur rippled through the room. Daniel kept his eyes forward. 2 weeks ago, Claire continued, I made a decision that could have harmed this company and everyone who works here. Silence. She didn't look at Daniel, but he felt the weight of her words. I'm not here to explain myself, she said. I'm here to take responsibility, the HR director shifted uncomfortably. I've enrolled in a leadership accountability program, Claire went on. Effective immediately, I'm also implementing new policies regarding executive conduct, mental health support, and transportation protocols. A few eyebrows rose. This isn't damage control, Claire said firmly. It's correction. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending. She was standing in it. And, Claire added, her gaze finally sweeping the table, I want to acknowledge the culture that allowed me to believe I had to carry everything alone. Her eyes met Daniel's for half a second. I intend to change that. The meeting ended shortly after. No accusations, no fallout. But something fundamental had shifted. Later that afternoon, Claire called Daniel into her office again. This time there was no folder, no tension. Just 2 cups of coffee on her desk. Sit, she said. Daniel did. I wanted you to hear this before it reaches the floor, Claire said. The board knows. His pulse quickened. About the incident, she said plainly. From me, Daniel exhaled slowly. They weren't pleased, she continued. But they respected the honesty. She leaned back. And they respected the fact that I didn't sacrifice someone else to protect myself. Daniel met her gaze. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Claire said quietly. I did? For a moment, neither spoke. Then she asked, Are you angry with me? The question caught him off guard. No, Daniel said after a pause. I was scared, but not angry, she nodded, absorbing that. I need to know something, Claire said. That night when you stepped in, you knew it could cost you. Yes. Why didn't it stop you? Daniel thought of Lily, of the police lights, of the choice between walking away and living with it. Because some things cost more if you don't do them, he said. Claire's eyes softened. Over the next month, the changes became visible. Not in headlines or press releases, but in hallways. Executives left earlier. People spoke more freely. Mistakes were addressed instead of buried. The company felt less like a machine and more like a place where humans worked. Daniel thrived in his new role. He learned quickly, managed efficiently. Earned trust not by authority, but by consistency. One afternoon, a junior employee knocked on his door. Mr. Carter, she said nervously, I made a mistake with the shipment logs. Daniel gestured for her to sit. Okay, let's fix it. Her shoulders relaxed instantly. Claire noticed. She watched how people gravitated toward Daniel not because he was loud or commanding, but because he was safe. It made her reflect on her own leadership. One evening, after most of the office had cleared out, Claire found herself standing outside Daniel's door. You heading out? She asked. In a few minutes, he said. Lily has a school project meltdown scheduled for tonight. She smiled. I remember those. He raised an eyebrow. You have kids? No, Claire said softly. But I had parents. They walked out together. In the parking lot, the same one where everything had started, Claire paused. I don't come out here alone anymore, she admitted. Daniel nodded. That's not weakness. I'm learning that, she said. That weekend, something unexpected happened. Daniel received a call from Lily's school. She was sick. By the time Daniel arrived, Lily was pale and curled into herself. He carried her home, worry knotting tight in his chest. Doctor visits, medicine, missed sleep. Monday morning came too fast. Daniel sent an email explaining he'd be late. The reply came immediately. Take the day. Don't rush. Claire, he stared at the screen. No guilt, no explanation demanded, just trust. That afternoon, while Lily slept, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out. A knock came at the door. He froze. No one ever came unannounced. He opened it cautiously. Claire stood there holding a bag. I brought soup, she said, and ginger tea. I wasn't sure what she likes. Daniel blinked. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Claire said simply. Lily peeked around the corner. That's the lady from the park, she said. Claire crouched slightly. Hi, Lily studied her. You look tired, Claire laughed softly. I am. You should sit, Lily said. Daddy says sitting helps. Claire glanced at Daniel, who shrugged. Wise advice, she said, stepping inside. They ate quietly. Later, as Claire prepared to leave, she paused. I don't want you to feel like you owe me, she said. Daniel shook his head. I don't. Good, she replied. Because this isn't repayment. It's, he asked. Connection, she said. After she left, Daniel sat on the couch, Lily asleep against his side. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not gratitude, but balance. The following weeks tested them both. Deadlines tightened. Pressure rose, a major contract teetered on collapse. In the past, Claire would have absorbed it all alone. This time, she didn't. She delegated, asked, trusted. Daniel stood beside her in meetings, offering insight, grounding conversations that threatened to spiral. One night, after a particularly brutal day, Claire leaned against the conference room table and laughed a tired, genuine sound. I would have burned out by now, she said. Daniel nodded. You still might, but not alone. She looked at him, really looked. You changed more than one night, she said. So did you, Daniel replied. By the end of the quarter, Whitmore Logistics posted its strongest internal satisfaction scores in years. The board praised leadership. Claire deflected credit. Daniel received recognition he hadn't sought. But the most important moment came quietly. One evening, as Daniel and Lily walked home from the park, Lily looked up at him. You're not scared all the time anymore, she said. Daniel stopped walking. What makes you say that? You don't sigh before bed, she replied. You used to, Daniel swallowed hard. You notice everything, he said. She smiled. I have to. You're my person. That night, Daniel texted Claire. Daniel, thank you. Claire, for what? Daniel, for not letting things go back to how they were. A moment passed. Claire, neither did you. Daniel set the phone down, heart steady. The morning after that night in the parking lot had changed everything. Not because of power? Not because of guilt, but because two people chose accountability over avoidance and discovered that facing the truth together was stronger than pretending it never happened. And that realization would carry them into what came next, whether they were ready for it or not. The changes that had begun quietly at Whitmore Logistics were no longer subtle. They were unmistakable, and Daniel Carter could feel them every time he stepped into the office. He had been promoted, yes, but that wasn't the half of it. He had a title now, authority, respect, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. But what made the real difference wasn't the promotion. It was the culture shift that had begun after that night in the parking lot, after he had driven Claire home when no one else would, after she had chosen honesty over pretense. It started with small things. Employees began arriving on time not out of fear, but because they wanted to be there. Meetings no longer felt like interrogations. They were discussions. Questions were asked freely without fear of reprisal. Mistakes were corrected, not punished. Daniel noticed the subtle shifts and felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that warmed from the inside out. One morning, as he poured his coffee, a young warehouse clerk hesitated near his desk. Mr. Carter? She asked timidly. Yes? He replied, I wanted to say thank you, she said, voice small. For being fair, for listening, for noticing. Daniel blinked. Noticing. It seemed a simple word, but it carried weight. You're welcome, he said, and the clerk walked away, visibly lighter. Claire, of course, noticed too. She had been watching. From her office, through the glass walls that no longer seemed intimidating, she observed Daniel's interactions with the staff. Not his authority, his empathy. Not his efficiency, but the way he carried responsibility without letting it crush him. She hadn't expected this. She had expected obedience. Efficiency. A warehouse manager who followed the rules and never questioned them. Instead, she found a man whose integrity had shaped an environment where people could breathe. And it unnerved her. At home, Daniel's life was slowly healing as well. Lily no longer rushed to finish homework in 5 minutes so he could get back to his long shifts. Daniel had time to sit with her, to help her with projects, to read with her before bedtime. "Daddy," Lily said one evening, holding up a notebook with a crayon drawing. "I made this for you." It was a picture of their apartment. The kitchen table was drawn enormous, almost taking up the whole page. And in the middle of it sat Daniel, smiling, holding her hand. "I'm really proud of you, Lily," Daniel said, voice thick. "I'm proud of you too, Daddy," she said, hugging him tightly. He realized that in the months before, he hadn't been truly present. He had existed around her, but he hadn't been there. Now he could breathe in her life again, and it made everything else feel possible. At the office, things were shifting in ways that Daniel didn't fully understand at first. Claire had started coming out of her office for more than meetings. She lingered in the hallways, asked employees about their lives, checked on minor projects that didn't require her attention, and even offered advice carefully, thoughtfully, without asserting her authority unnecessarily. Daniel noticed her change firsthand during a staff meeting. "Team," Claire said, her voice steady but warm, "I want to highlight something. Mistakes happen, but how we handle them defines us. Daniel has shown us that, and I'd like to encourage all of us to follow his example, take responsibility, support each other, and communicate openly." The room was quiet for a moment, absorbing the rare acknowledgement. Claire looked at Daniel, and for just an instant he saw her vulnerability. Not the vulnerability that came from drunken mistakes, but the vulnerability that came from admitting she had been wrong and was actively working to change. And Daniel? He felt something shift in himself, too. He had always respected her for her power, but now he respected her for her courage. Their relationship began to develop a rhythm outside of authority and hierarchy. One Thursday evening after a particularly grueling day, Daniel found Claire standing in the parking lot again, this time not under flashing police lights but under the dim glow of street lamp, papers in hand, hair slightly messy from a long day. "You staying late again?" Daniel asked, approaching. "Yes," Claire admitted. "I didn't finish the board report." "And I wanted to get a head start on the annual review?" Daniel studied her, remembering the night he had driven her home. The difference was palpable. She wasn't reckless now. She wasn't hiding. She was responsible, deliberate, aware. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. She smiled faintly. "I know, but it's hard to ask for help sometimes." "I understand," Daniel said quietly. "But help isn't weakness. It's survival." Claire glanced at him, truly glanced, and he noticed something behind her eyes, a recognition, an understanding. She saw him differently now, not as a subordinate, but as someone whose judgment she could trust. Life at home and at work began to weave together in a pattern Daniel hadn't experienced in years. He had energy again, focus, patience, and with that, he discovered small joys he had almost forgotten. Cooking dinner with Lily became an event. Grocery shopping was less stressful because he had time to plan. Bedtime stories weren't rushed, they were immersive. He found himself laughing more, fully, without holding back. And Claire, too, was evolving. She started taking better care of herself. She stopped skipping meals, stopped working through nights that could be spent resting. She started therapy sessions she had long delayed. She started leaving the office on time, if not early. And she even began attending some community events she had once avoided because they demanded a persona she couldn't maintain. One evening, Daniel walked into his office to find Claire standing at his desk. "Thought you might need a hand," she said, smiling. "I'm learning the finer points of warehouse logistics." "Don't laugh," Daniel chuckled. "I won't, but it's harder than it looks." She leaned on the desk, eyes bright. "I've noticed. And I've been thinking, you make people feel safe. And I want to know how." Daniel blinked. No one had asked him that before. "Not seriously. It's not magic," he said. "It's patience, honesty, and the willingness to admit mistakes." Claire nodded slowly, absorbing it. "That's rare. More than rare," Daniel said. "It's necessary." There were nights when Daniel reflected on how different his life had become in such a short time. A month ago, he would have been exhausted, running on fumes, scrambling to keep Lily's life and his own from unraveling. Now, he had clarity, energy, and structure. He could be present without feeling guilty. He could be effective without being consumed. And he could finally see Claire as more than a demanding boss. She was a person navigating her own struggles, making mistakes and learning from them. and Daniel felt quietly that he could trust her. One particularly rainy afternoon, Daniel and Claire found themselves walking to their cars together. Rain soaked the streets, and people were scattered trying to reach shelter. "You walk in the rain like it's nothing," Daniel remarked. Claire shrugged. "I've always liked the rain. Cleans everything." Daniel glanced at her, noticing her relaxed posture, the way she no longer seemed like a CEO guarding her fortress. She was human again, fallible, honest, approachable. "I can see why people respect you," she said suddenly. "Not just for what you do, but for how you do it." Daniel shook his head. "I don't do anything extraordinary, I just care." She smiled, but it was different than before, less corporate, more genuine. "Caring isn't easy in a place like this?" "No," Daniel admitted. "It's not. But it makes all the difference." The rain soaked them, but neither moved for an umbrella. They walked slowly, side by side, the distance between boss and employee shrinking imperceptibly with each step. By the end of the week, it was clear to everyone that Daniel's life had changed, and so had Claire's. The office was calmer. Staff were happier, mistakes were fewer, productivity was higher. And yet, none of it felt artificial, none of it was orchestrated. It was the natural result of accountability, honesty, and mutual respect. At home, Daniel tucked Lily into bed and kissed her forehead. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you like your new job?" "I do," he said. "I like it a lot. And you like your boss?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I do too. But she's more than just my boss." Lily tilted her head. "She's your friend?" "Yes," Daniel said. "My friend." The night stretched quietly. Daniel sat in his living room reflecting on the last few weeks. The changes were profound, subtle, and real. Claire had shown him a side of leadership he hadn't expected, vulnerability paired with accountability. She had shown the office a side of management they rarely saw, compassion paired with authority. And she had inadvertently given him the gift of time, space, and trust that allowed him to rediscover his life. He realized then that what had begun as a single, impulsive act, driving a drunk boss home from the parking lot, had set off a chain of events that healed not just him, but the company and perhaps even Claire herself. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. For the first time in a long time, Daniel Carter felt whole, and he knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Because when work and life begin to heal, they heal together. And nothing, not even mistakes or missteps, could undo that. The transformation at Whitmore Logistics was no longer subtle. Daniel Carter had established himself as more than just a competent warehouse manager. He had become a cornerstone of stability for the staff and a reliable presence for Claire Whitmore, whose life, for all her success, had been unrelentingly isolated. What Daniel didn't realize at first was that Claire's trust had grown into something far more personal. It began quietly, with small interactions that carried weight. One Monday morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual to find Claire standing by the entrance to the warehouse floor. Her coffee in hand, hair slightly mussed from the early rush, she looked less intimidating than usual, less like the untouchable CEO everyone feared, more like a human being who simply wanted to start the day. "You're early," Daniel remarked, smiling faintly. "I wanted to see the first shift start smoothly," Claire replied. "And to check on you." Daniel blinked. "Me?" "Yes," she said, her tone soft but serious. "I know what you've been managing. I want to make sure you're not carrying too much." He looked at her, realizing she wasn't offering supervision or authority, she was offering concern. A human concern that had nothing to do with hierarchy or business metrics. From that day forward, their professional relationship began to change. It was subtle at first, shared coffee breaks, casual conversations in the hallways, even a few jokes exchanged over reports and schedules. The office noticed, whispering quietly but never crossing into gossip. And then came the dinners. It started with Claire suggesting they eat lunch together once a week to discuss project strategy. Daniel, cautious, had agreed, assuming it would remain strictly business. But it quickly became apparent that Claire valued the time for something else entirely, a chance to talk without emails, without reports, without the ever-present pressure of the boardroom. One evening, after a particularly long meeting that stretched past dinner, Claire said, "There's a new Italian place nearby, quiet. I thought maybe we could grab a bite." Daniel hesitated. "With work?" No, she said, shaking her head. No work, just conversation. The meal was simple, but it changed the tone of their interactions forever. They began to share stories outside of work, childhood memories, small regrets, minor embarrassments that neither would have shared in the office. Claire spoke of a childhood where perfection was demanded at every turn, where mistakes were punished with cold silence, and love was conditional. She spoke of the pressure to succeed, to maintain control, and how drinking had been her escape. Daniel, in turn, spoke of his wife, her illness, the hospital nights, and the desperate effort to keep Lily's life stable. He shared the humor in small parenting victories and the heartbreak of moments he could not prevent. For the first time in years, both of them spoke without masks. The next step came when Lily became aware of Claire's presence in their lives. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Daniel had promised Lily a trip to the park. Claire had offered to tag along, partly out of curiosity, partly out of genuine interest in seeing him outside the confines of the office. Lily, perceptive as always, studied Claire carefully. "Are you Daddy's boss?" she asked bluntly, her eyes squinting in curiosity. Claire crouched slightly, looking at Lily eye to eye. "I was," she said. Lily frowned. "Was?" "Yes," Claire said, glancing at Daniel. "I think now I'm just his friend." Lily considered this for a moment. Then she nodded solemnly. "Okay." Trust, it seemed, could be granted quickly to those who deserved it. In the weeks that followed, their bond deepened. They spent more evenings discussing life rather than work. Claire began to open up about her fear of silence, how drinking had masked her anxieties, and how she had rarely allowed herself to be vulnerable. Daniel, in turn, offered quiet understanding, sharing insights not as guidance from a position of authority, but as one human being connecting with another. Even at work, the dynamic shifted. Their mutual respect became visible. Employees noticed that Claire deferred to Daniel in areas he had earned authority, and Daniel began to navigate office politics with subtlety, his confidence no longer fueled by fear, but by genuine understanding. Then came the evening that Daniel would never forget. It was late, and the office was empty. Claire appeared at his door holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "I thought you might need this," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Hot chocolate? Not coffee?" "I thought you could use something comforting," she said, smiling. "And maybe someone to talk to." They sat in the empty office, the glow of city lights through the windows. Conversation flowed easily. They spoke of dreams, regrets, and hopes of life beyond the confines of the office. For the first time, Daniel realized that what had started as a professional relationship had evolved into a friendship rooted in honesty, trust, and shared vulnerability. The progression was not without challenges. Daniel was cautious, aware that any misstep could jeopardize both his professional standing and the trust he had built with Claire. Claire, too, was navigating uncharted territory, balancing authority with a desire for connection, learning to trust someone who had once been her subordinate. But they were careful, thoughtful, respectful, and the bond grew stronger. By the end of the quarter, the transformation was undeniable. Daniel had become a central figure in the company's culture, a person people could rely on. Claire had begun to step away from her need for control, learning to trust those around her. Together, they had created an environment where honesty, integrity, and empathy were valued as much as efficiency and profit. And outside the office, their friendship had blossomed into something quietly profound. One evening, Daniel returned home to find Claire standing at his door, holding a small gift for Lily, a book she had mentioned in passing during one of their lunches. "Lily loves stories," she said, smiling. "I thought she might enjoy this one." Lily's eyes lit up. "You remembered." Claire knelt to hand her the book. "Of course," she said. "How could I forget?" Daniel watched them interact, his heart swelling. He realized that what he had feared, a blurred boundary between personal and professional life, had instead become a source of stability, warmth, and connection for both of them. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel and Claire continued to navigate their evolving relationship. They shared dinners, weekend outings, and quiet conversations that deepened their understanding of one another. They supported each other's challenges, celebrated successes, and confronted fears, both personal and professional. And through it all, Daniel never forgot the night he had driven Claire home, the moment that had sparked this profound shift. It was more than a favor. It was the beginning of a bond that transcended titles, hierarchy, and office walls, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared humanity. By the time the year drew to a close, Daniel realized something remarkable. He had once believed that life as a single parent and a diligent employee meant constant struggle, sacrifice, and compromise. But now, he saw that trust, honesty, and mutual support could create a life richer than he had imagined. Claire had become more than a boss. She had become a friend, a confidant, and a witness to the resilience and integrity that had always defined him. And Daniel had become more than an employee. He had become a partner in building a workplace, and a life where compassion, accountability, and human connection mattered. It was a lesson that neither of them had anticipated. Sometimes, the lines between professional and personal life blur not because of recklessness or desire, but because two people choose honesty, integrity, and empathy over pretense. Sometimes, a single act of courage driving a boss home on a rainy night can evolve into a bond that changes the course of two lives forever. And sometimes, what begins as a professional connection can grow into something more profound, more enduring, and more human than either person could have imagined. Daniel watched Lily asleep that night, book in hand, and smiled softly. He turned to Claire, who was standing quietly in the corner, watching him with a gentle expression. "You never asked me to forget that night," she said quietly. "No," Daniel replied. "I didn't, and neither did you." They shared a small, meaningful smile. In that moment, Daniel realized that trust, once earned and honored, had the power to heal, to transform, and to create something lasting, both at work and in life. And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter felt truly, completely, and irrevocably at home in the world he had built around him. The morning sun cut through the blinds like a promise. Daniel Carter stretched in the quiet of his apartment, listening to the distant hum of the city as it stirred awake. For the first time in years, the day felt like an opportunity rather than a test of endurance. Lily stirred beside him, the soft rhythm of her breathing grounding him in the life he had rebuilt piece by piece. "Daddy," she murmured, blinking at the sunlight. "Can we go to the park today?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Of course, baby. But let's have breakfast first." The simplicity of the morning reminded him of how far they had come. It had only been a year since that night in the parking lot, yet so much had changed. At Whitmore Logistics, the office had settled into a new rhythm. The culture Daniel and Claire had cultivated had taken root, and it was visible in the way employees carried themselves. People worked harder not because of fear, but because of trust. Meetings were efficient but compassionate. Mistakes were corrected with guidance, not punishment. Daniel had become a cornerstone of this environment. He was approachable, fair, and consistent. People respected him, not because of his title, but because of who he was. Claire noticed everything. She had always been meticulous, but now her gaze lingered on Daniel in a way she hadn't allowed herself before. Not with authority, but with admiration. She saw his integrity, his patience, and his unwavering commitment to both his daughter and the people around him. And she knew that the bond they had formed, the trust, the honesty, the shared vulnerability, had grown into something rare and unshakable. That afternoon, Claire found herself standing outside Daniel's office. She hesitated before knocking. "Come in," Daniel said. She entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might like a break," she said, offering him one. Daniel accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thanks, I could use it." They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee. Then Claire spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Daniel, I wanted to thank you again. For everything you've done, not just that night, but since then, for being honest, for being patient, for being you." Daniel met her gaze. "You don't have to thank me." I did what I thought was right. I know, she said. But that doesn't mean I won't acknowledge it. I've seen what integrity looks like, and it's rare. You've reminded me that people can be trusted, and that trust is worth protecting. He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I've learned a lot from you too, about responsibility, about leadership, about courage. Claire smiled faintly. And about humility, she added. Daniel chuckled. I hope I've earned a little of yours. You have, she said. Over the next few months, their friendship deepened. They shared dinners, weekend outings, and quiet conversations that had nothing to do with work. Daniel introduced Claire to Lily's world, her drawings, her favorite books, her excitement over small victories. Claire, in turn, shared parts of herself she had kept hidden, her fears, her loneliness, her moments of doubt and insecurity. It was a delicate balance, navigating the transition from professional colleagues to friends, but they managed it with care. Respect and honesty were the foundation of their bond, and it allowed them to connect without fear of missteps or misunderstanding. One evening, after a long week, Daniel found Claire waiting outside his apartment. She held a small gift for Lily, a handmade bookmark decorated with stars. Thought she might like this for her reading, Claire said, smiling. Lily's eyes lit up when she saw it. You remembered, she exclaimed. I try, Claire said gently. Daniel watched the interaction, his heart swelling. He realized that what had started as a single act of kindness, driving a boss home one night, had grown into a relationship built on trust, respect, and mutual care. The next challenge came when a major contract threatened the company. The board was tense, deadlines were looming, and stress was palpable. In the past, Claire would have absorbed it all herself, retreating into late nights and endless pressure. But now she leaned on Daniel. Can I count on your input for the strategy meeting? She asked. Always, Daniel replied. Together they worked through the crisis. Daniel's calm presence balanced Claire's intensity. His insights and experience guided decisions that might have otherwise been rash. And in those long hours, their bond strengthened further, not romantically, but with an understanding and trust that neither had anticipated. By the time the contract was secured, both of them had a renewed appreciation for what they could achieve together. One quiet evening, as Daniel tucked Lily into bed, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. Daddy, she said, do you think she'll always be our friend? Daniel smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. I think she will, baby. She's proven that she keeps her promises, Lily nodded, satisfied. Good, because I like her. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest. Lily's simple acceptance and intuition reminded him why he had fought to be present in her life. It also reminded him why he had acted without hesitation that night in the parking lot. Some things, integrity, compassion, trust, were worth the risk. As the year drew to a close, Daniel reflected on everything that had happened. The company had transformed. His relationship with Claire had evolved into one of deep friendship and mutual respect. His life with Lily had found balance, joy, and stability. And yet, he knew that none of it would have been possible without that single moment of courage, the night he had driven Claire home, the night he had chosen action over fear, responsibility over convenience. He remembered the flash of police lights, the weight of potential disaster, and the quiet trust that had passed between him and Claire in that car. He had not asked her to forget. She had not asked him to forget. And that choice not to pretend the night never happened had been the foundation of everything that followed. Months later, Claire invited Daniel to a small company celebration, recognizing staff achievements. As he looked around the room, he noticed the subtle changes, employees laughing more freely, interacting with genuine warmth, approaching Claire with ideas rather than fear. Claire approached him, her expression quiet and sincere. "Daniel," she said, "I want you to know I remember that night. And I always will." Daniel met her gaze. "I know," she smiled. "I meant what I said back then. I won't pretend it never happened. I won't ignore it. And I won't take it for granted." "Neither will I," Daniel replied. In that moment, he realized something profound. Real respect and real trust weren't about pretending mistakes didn't happen. They were about acknowledging them, learning from them, and choosing to grow. Later, as the party continued around them, Daniel stepped outside to the balcony, looking over the city lights. Claire joined him quietly. They didn't speak at first, just shared the view. The hum of life below, the distant sounds of traffic, the glow of the city, it all felt alive, hopeful, and enduring. Finally, Claire spoke. "I used to think that mistakes defined you. That one misstep could ruin everything," Daniel nodded. "I used to believe that too, but sometimes it's the choices after the mistake that matter more." She looked at him. "You taught me that night, and since then, you've reminded me that integrity and courage can change lives. And so can forgiveness," Daniel said quietly. Claire smiled, a warmth in her eyes he had never seen before. "Yes, and remembering." Choosing not to forget, Daniel felt a quiet gratitude fill him, for trust, for honesty, for a relationship that had grown from a single act of courage into something enduring. And as he stood there with Claire, he realized that their lives had been irrevocably changed, not by power, not by wealth, not by circumstance, but by the choices they made and the trust they honored. For Daniel Carter, the morning after that fateful night had set off a chain reaction of accountability, friendship, and personal growth. And now, looking over the city, he knew that the journey they had begun together would continue rooted in honesty, strengthened by integrity, and guided by the choice they had both made to never forget. The story of that night in the parking lot and the months that followed had a simple truth. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the largest ripples. And for Daniel and Claire, those ripples had rewritten their lives, forever intertwining work, life, and trust in ways neither imagined possible. Because when you choose to act rightly, when you choose to trust, and when you choose not to forget, you create a foundation strong enough to carry two lives and sometimes more through anything. And Daniel Carter, the single dad who had simply done what he felt was right, finally understood that some choices don't just save a night, they save a future.